One phone call. One word in Italian, and the air shattered. Laughter died mid-echo, glasses stopped mid-air. 6 powerful men turned, their silence heavier than gunfire, their eyes locked on the waitress who didn't yet know she'd crossed an invisible line. 4-1 heartbeat, power and innocence collided, and the world tilted. By dawn, the man they called Illinois Leone would light a cigarette, smile through the smoke, and whisper the words that would change everything. Bring her to me. Before we jump in, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? And what kind of story do you crave next? Drop your answer in the comments below. If stories like this grip your heart and refuse to let go, well, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've got another powerful story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's get into today's story. The clink of crystal glasses. The low hum of expensive laughter. And then, silence. It happened in a heartbeat. One small word. Soft. Trembling. Pronto. The kind of word that belonged to another world, another life. But the moment Michelle Hernandez spoke it, everything inside La Fenice Rossa stopped. At table 13, 6 men in tailored suits turned toward her. And at the head of the table sat the one man who didn't need to move to command the room. Alexis Mancha. Dark hair slicked back with precision. Eyes sharp enough to slice through pretense. The kind of man who never needed to speak twice, or explain what happened to those who didn't listen. Michelle didn't know his name yet. Didn't know the whispers that followed him, the kind that carried words like mafia, bloodlines, and power. She only knew her phone had rung, the number from Naples flashing on the screen. Her mother's caregiver. Her heartbeat faltered. So she stepped back, away from the men, voice barely a whisper. Pronto.
Sì, la sto ascoltando, la mamma.
Her tone cracked, the accent unmistakable, native Italian, pure and fluent. She turned her face toward the kitchen wall, trying to hide the tears as the nurse explained. Her mother's heart was failing.
Capisco.
Grazie, she whispered, closing her eyes. When she turned back, every conversation had died. Even the music had stopped. 6 men stared. And at the head, Mancha's gaze locked onto hers, cold, assessing, and far too calm. For a moment, it felt like he saw through her, the bruised woman beneath the black uniform, the ghost of fear that still lingered from the life she'd fled in Miami. She looked away. But it was already too late. That single word, spoken out of love, out of loss, had drawn her into his world. Before sunrise, he would know her name, her address, her past. And before the week was over, she would know what it meant to be noticed by Alexis Mancha. As the last guests left, the manager approached her, pale and nervous. Michelle, he whispered, the gentleman from table 13, he asked for your full name. Her hands froze around the wine glass she was polishing. What did you tell him? He swallowed hard. You don't say no to Alexis Mancha. The words followed Michelle all the way home, echoing in her chest like an unwelcome heartbeat. They looped in her head as she took the late train back to Queens, the metal hum beneath her feet sinking with her pulse. Outside, New York was half asleep, but the city's cold had teeth that bit through her thin coat. Her building stood crouched between 2 taller ones, a forgotten corner of cracked brick and flickering streetlights. She pushed through the narrow stairwell, the smell of someone's burnt dinner still hanging in the air. Inside her apartment, she dropped her bag and leaned against the door, letting the silence settle. She wanted to believe the night was over, that the man at table 13 had already forgotten her face. But the way he'd looked at her, steady, unblinking, almost curious, stayed with her. That look wasn't the kind men gave to strangers they'd forget by morning. Sleep didn't come easily. She tossed on a small couch, replaying the call, her mother's weakening voice, the soft Italian words that had betrayed her. Guilt pressed against her ribs until she sat up, staring at the city lights bleeding through the blinds. She whispered to herself, "It's over. It has to be." But when dawn came, the world outside her window wasn't quiet. A black car idled at the curb, its engine purring low and steady. The kind of car that didn't belong on her street. Sleek, tinted, expensive. A contrast so sharp against the graffiti and garbage bins that it made her throat tighten. Her first instinct was denial. Maybe someone else's ride. Maybe a rich man lost in the wrong neighborhood. She went to make coffee, hands trembling as she poured water into the machine. But then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, measured, confident. Michelle froze. The sound felt deliberate, as if whoever was outside already knew she was standing just beyond the door. She opened it a few inches, enough to see a tall man in a dark coat, his posture too composed to be a neighbor. He didn't smile. Miss Hernandez. Her stomach flipped. Yes. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Mancha, he said smoothly, his voice carrying the crisp tone of someone who was used to being obeyed. He requests your presence. Immediately. Requests. Her grip on the doorknob tightened. Why? I'm not at liberty to discuss the details. He gestured toward the car with a gloved hand. Please. It won't take long. Every instinct screamed no, but curiosity whispered louder. What could he possibly want with her? I have work soon, she said weakly, searching for a reason, any reason to refuse. You won't need to worry about that today, he replied. Mr. Mancha has arranged it. That stopped her. Arranged? What? Your shift. You've been excused. Her pulse stumbled. Whoever this man was, he had power that reached further than she could comprehend. Still, she hesitated at the door, eyes darting down the hallway, half expecting someone to appear and say this was a mistake. But the silence pressed in. She stepped out. The car's door opened automatically, the interior glowing with soft light and the faint scent of leather and cedar. She slid inside, her breath fogging the window as the city blurred past. No words were exchanged. The driver didn't look back. The streets grew cleaner, quieter, until she realized they were heading toward the East River, toward a skyline she had only seen from afar. By the time the car stopped, her hands were damp against her knees. The building that loomed before her was all glass and marble, its doorman already holding the door open. Inside, the silence was thick, the kind that cost money. Everything gleamed, polished floors, white orchids, gold fixtures. She followed the driver into a private elevator. The ride up felt endless. When the doors opened, she was met with a view that swallowed the skyline. Manhattan stretched beneath a wall of windows. And there, standing in front of that view, was Alexis Mancha. He didn't turn immediately. He was dressed in a tailored suit, sleeves rolled to the wrist, a watch that probably cost more than her apartment catching the light. His reflection in the glass looked almost ghostly, half in this world, half outside of it. Sit, he said finally, his voice calm but commanding. She Saturday. Her chair was soft, the kind that swallows you, but she felt anything but comfortable. Mancha turned then, and when his gaze met hers, it felt like a hand around her throat, gentle but firm. You speak Italian, he said simply. Her lips parted, but no words came. Fluently, he continued. Your mother's from Naples. Yes, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I heard sadness in your voice last night. His tone softened, though his expression didn't. You've lost someone. Not yet, she said, looking down at her hands. For a moment, there was quiet, so long she could hear her own breathing. I'm sorry, he said at last, and somehow, she believed him. But then he moved toward the desk, and the air shifted again, business replacing sympathy. He gestured to a polished envelope lying on the glass surface. Beside it, a plane ticket. Naples, he said. Tomorrow morning. You'll go see her. Her pulse stuttered. I can't afford. You won't need to. She looked up sharply. Why are you doing this? His mouth curved, though it wasn't quite a smile. Call it a gesture of goodwill. From who? A stranger. Not a stranger. His eyes glinted with something unreadable. Not anymore. It should have terrified her, his certainty, the way he spoke as if her life had already been mapped out by his will alone. And yet, a strange calmness spread through her, the kind that comes when fear and relief collide. Her fingers brushed the ticket, trembling. I can't accept this. You can, he said quietly. And you will. There was no menace in his voice, no overt threat, just inevitability. He stepped closer, stopping only inches away. The scent of his cologne, dark, restrained, filled her senses. You remind me, he said softly, that innocence still exists. I'm curious how long it will last. The words struck her harder than any command could have. She didn't know if it was admiration or warning, or both. For a moment, neither spoke. The city stretched below them, a sea of light and noise, while in that room, everything held still. Finally, Mancha turned back toward the window, his tone shifting again, cold and final. A car will collect you at 6. Don't be late. And with that, she was dismissed. As she rode the elevator down, her mind spun. Was this protection, or control? A gift, or a debt waiting to be collected? Outside, the car door opened once more, waiting. She sank into the seat, clutching the envelope. When she peeled it open, her breath caught. Stacks of cash. Enough to cover her rent for months. Enough to buy her silence if he wanted it. The ticket gleamed beneath the crisp bills. First class. Naples. Departure. Tomorrow at 10:20 a.m. Tears blurred her vision. Gratitude, guilt, fear, all twisted into something she couldn't name. The city rolled past her window again, colder now, sharper. And for the first time, she understood the strange comfort in his voice, the quiet confidence of a man who never asked for permission. As the car pulled up to her building, the driver spoke for the first time. He said to tell you, everything he gives, he can take away. Michelle sat frozen, the envelope heavy in her lap. She didn't know what frightened her more, that Alexis Mancha could change her life overnight, or that a part of her, deep down, wanted him to. If you were Michelle, would you take the ticket, or walk away? Comment below what you would do. Michelle didn't sleep that night. The envelope sat on her table, half open, its contents like a silent promise, or a warning she couldn't yet read. Every so often, she'd pick up the ticket, running her thumb over the embossed letters of her name. Michelle Hernandez, Naples, Italy. It looked unreal, like a dream printed on paper. Outside, the city never stopped moving. Taxi horns, distant sirens, the endless hum of New York. But inside her tiny apartment, it was only her thoughts, and the gnawing truth. She was about to step back into the world she'd spent years running from. By dawn, her bags were packed, one small suitcase, the same one she'd carried out of Miami 3 years ago. Inside it, folded neatly beside a single change of clothes, lay her mother's rosary and the letter she'd written months ago but never sent. When the car arrived, she was ready, or at least, she told herself she was. The airport felt colder than usual, the kind of chill that crept under her skin and refused to leave. She moved through security on autopilot, clutching the passport Mancha's driver had returned with that morning. It wasn't just renewed, it had been expedited. Someone, somewhere, had moved strings for her. At the gate, she sat by the window, staring at the plane that would take her home. Home. The word didn't fit anymore. Naples had become a memory frozen in time, her mother's laughter echoing through kitchen walls scented with garlic and basil, her father's record player humming old Cuban jazz on Sundays. Before loss. Before fear. Before she'd learned that love could turn violent in an instant. When boarding began, she hesitated, her reflection caught in the glass, just another woman trying to look brave. Then she exhaled and stepped forward. The cabin was hushed, the kind of quiet only money could buy. First class. She didn't belong here. The seats smelled of leather and champagne. The passengers smelled of indifference. She pressed her forehead to the window as the city shrank beneath her, a glittering web of gold fading into the horizon. For a long time, she just watched the clouds. Then, somewhere over the Atlantic, her mind drifted back to the night everything had gone wrong in Miami. She could still hear his voice, Diego, low and calm, the kind of tone that came before the storm. You think you can just walk away from me, huh? She'd been standing by the door, suitcase in hand, heart thundering. You owe them money, not me. He'd laughed, slow and cruel. You think they care whose name's on the paper? That was the last night she saw him. The night she learned what men were capable of when control slipped through their fingers. And now, 3 years later, another man had found her. But this time, his power wasn't shouted in anger. It was whispered in generosity. She wasn't sure which was worse. The flight attendant paused beside her seat, her red lipstick bright against the pale dawn light. Would you like champagne, miss? Michelle blinked, startled from her thoughts. Just water, please. The woman nodded, pouring the glass with mechanical grace. Traveling for business or pleasure? Michelle hesitated, her lips parting before the truth caught in her throat. What could she say? That she didn't know. That she was flying towards something that felt like both salvation and danger wrapped in the same gesture? She smiled faintly instead. Something in between. The attendant gave her a polite nod and moved on. Michelle turned back to the window. The sky was beginning to lighten, the first blush of dawn spilling over the curve of the earth. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her mother's rosary, the silver beads cool against her palm. Mama, she whispered, voice trembling, I'm coming. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes, the faint bruise-like shadows beneath them. But behind the exhaustion was something else she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was hope. Maybe fear. Maybe both. Halfway across the ocean, she began to wonder if Mancha had planned more than he'd said. The thought came unbidden but wouldn't leave. The timing. The convenience. The money. It was too precise. Her flight arranged overnight, her passport renewed, her job excused. None of that happened by accident. Did Mancha orchestrate more than he let on? The idea clawed at her. Because if he had the power to send her to Italy in less than 12 hours, what else could he do? Still, she couldn't hate him. Gratitude mixed with unease, twisting her insides. He had given her a chance to see her mother again. And yet, in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that every gift came with invisible strings. She thought of his voice in that high-rise office. Low, calm, deliberate. You remind me that innocence still exists. I'm curious how long it will last. The words echoed through her like a prophecy. As the hours passed, she drifted between sleep and memory. Dreams of her mother's kitchen blurred into flashes of Mancha's gaze. She saw his silhouette against the window, the city at his feet, his words curling through her like smoke. By the time the plane began its descent, her chest ached from all the things she hadn't said. The seatbelt light flicked on. Outside, Naples shimmered beneath morning haze, gold roofs, narrow streets, the sea glinting in the distance. Her breath caught. Home. After all these years. But something in her chest tightened. The feeling that this wasn't a return. It was a reckoning. The wheels touched down. The cabin filled with polite clapping, the sound distant and strange. Michelle's hands trembled as she packed her things, sliding the rosary into her pocket. She followed the crowd through customs, the smell of espresso and jet fuel filling the air. The language of her childhood surrounded her, soft vowels, rolling RS, warm voices. But instead of comfort, she felt a quiet panic. The arrivals hall gleamed with light, travelers rushing to reunite with loved ones. She searched for the face she longed to see, her mother's, frail but smiling. Instead, she saw a man in a black suit holding a sign. Her name was written on it in elegant handwriting. Her pulse quickened. He caught her gaze immediately and nodded, stepping forward. Miss Hernandez. Yes, she said cautiously. He offered a polite smile, but his eyes held the same professional coldness as Mancha's driver. Mr. Mancha sends his car. The world seemed to tilt. What? She stammered. I thought, he's in New York. The man's expression didn't change. Mr. Mancha prefers to ensure your comfort. Please, come with me. Her throat went dry. Around her, families reunited in laughter, lovers embraced, children ran into waiting arms. She was the only one being escorted like property. Outside, the Italian sun poured over the marble of the airport, dazzling and deceptive. The car waiting at the curb was identical to the one in New York, sleek, black, silent. Michelle hesitated at the door, the sea air thick with salt and memory. For a second, she thought of running, disappearing into the crowd, buying another ticket, changing her name again. But she knew that would be useless. Men like Mancha didn't lose things they'd claimed, whether it was a deal, a city, or a woman who'd caught their attention. She exhaled shakily and slid into the back seat. The driver nodded once, merging into the coastal road. The city unfolded before her in flashes, pastel houses, laundry strung between balconies, old men shouting from market stalls. It was beautiful, heartbreakingly familiar. But beneath the beauty, she felt the invisible pull of Mancha's influence, threading through every turn. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass and whispered, "What do you really want from me?" No one answered. Only the sea kept speaking, its waves crashing against the cliffs like a warning. As they drove deeper into Naples, the ache in her chest grew heavier. Gratitude tangled with dread until she couldn't tell them apart. She wasn't just going home to her mother. She was stepping into a web spun long before she'd realized she was caught. And somewhere across an ocean, Alexis Mancha was waiting for her next move. If you were in Michelle's place, would you trust Mancha's generosity, or see it as control? Tell me in the comments below, what would you do? The car wound through the narrow streets of Naples, sunlight flickering through the gaps between old buildings, the sea glittering in the distance like a secret. Michelle sat in silence, watching the world blur past. Children chased a soccer ball through a cobblestone alley. Old women shouted from balconies, their voices sharp but warm. It was life, raw, familiar, alive. And yet, inside the car, The air felt cold. The driver didn't speak, not once. He navigated the labyrinth of streets until they reached the outskirts of the city, where the sound of waves softened and the scent of salt gave way to antiseptic. The hospice stood at the top of a hill overlooking the bay. White walls, tall pines, the kind of place built to feel peaceful for those who no longer had time to leave. Michelle's hands trembled as she stepped out. She had dreamed of this moment for months, the reunion, the first glimpse of her mother's eyes after years apart. But as the driver followed her inside, she couldn't ignore the tension threading through her chest. The reception desk gleamed with polished marble. The nurse looked up, her eyes kind but cautious. "Signorina Hernandez? Your mother is awake today. She's been asking for you." Michelle swallowed the lump rising in her throat.
Grazie.
The nurse smiled faintly and gestured toward the corridor. Room 214. She turned, but then froze. A scent caught her off guard. Lilies. Dozens of them. Their sweetness filled the hallway, too strong, almost suffocating. And there, beside the door to her mother's room, stood an enormous bouquet, white lilies, pale roses, and sprigs of olive leaves, arranged with surgical precision. Tucked among them was a card. She didn't need to read it to know. Still, she did. In neat handwriting. "For your mother. May her heart rest easy. A.M." Her chest tightened. Mafia. He had never met her mother. Yet somehow, he was already here. Inside the room, the air was quiet except for the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. Her mother lay against white pillows, her face thin but peaceful, her hands folded over a blanket. The late afternoon light filtered through gauzy curtains, painting everything gold. "Mama," Michelle whispered, her voice cracking. She moved to the bedside, taking the frail hand in hers. Her mother's eyes fluttered open, slow, heavy with medication. Then, recognition, soft and trembling. "Figlia ma." Her voice was barely a breath. "You came." Michelle pressed her forehead against her mother's hand. "Of course I came. I'm here now." Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and endless. For a long moment, neither spoke. The machines hummed, the light shifted, and time seemed to hold its breath. When the nurse came to check the four, she gave Michelle a sympathetic smile. "She's been waiting for you." The doctors, they did everything they could. Michelle nodded, unable to trust her voice. She sat for hours, watching her mother sleep, brushing strands of silver hair from her face. But as dusk crept across the room, the peace she felt began to sour. She noticed small details, the fresh flowers that hadn't been there an hour ago, the expensive silk throw draped across the foot of the bed, the quiet nurse who came and went but never made eye contact. Something was off. When she finally stepped into the hallway for air, she found the answer. A woman stood at the far end, half in shadow. Dark hair pulled into a tight bun, phone in hand, eyes fixed on Michelle. Not nursing staff, her clothes were too sleek, her posture too alert. The woman didn't look away, even when their eyes met. Michelle's stomach turned cold. She started toward her, but the woman turned and disappeared down the stairwell. When she returned to the room, the nurse was adjusting the monitor. "Signorina?" Michelle asked quietly. "The woman outside, do you know her?" The nurse hesitated. "Which woman?" "She was watching me. Tall, dark hair, not staff." The nurse's hands stilled on the bed rail. Perhaps a visitor. But the look in her eyes said otherwise. Later, when the nurse brought in dinner, a small tray of broth and bread, she leaned close, lowering her voice. "Signorina Hernandez," she murmured in Italian. "You are very lucky." Michelle frowned. "Lucky?" The nurse's eyes darted toward the doorway, as if checking for someone unseen. "He pays for everything. The doctors, the medicine, even the flowers." Michelle's breath caught. "He, Mafia." The nurse nodded quickly. "Yes. The staff were told to give your mother the best care. Money is no problem." She hesitated, then added softly, "For a man like that, it never is." Michelle felt the room tilt. Gratitude warred with unease until her stomach ached. Did he come here? The nurse looked away. "No. But he calls. Often." When the door closed behind her, Michelle sank into the chair by the window, her mind spinning. Mafia's generosity was impossible to ignore. But now it felt different. Not kindness, but possession. As if every gesture, every dollar, was another invisible link in a chain tightening around her life. The phone on the nightstand buzzed, making her jump. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. Michelle. His voice, smooth, unmistakable, and somehow more intimate across an ocean than it had been in person. How is she? She exhaled shakily. Better. I think. The doctors say her heart is stable for now. That's good. He paused. The lilies arrived. Her throat tightened. Yes. Good, he said again, quiet. They were her favorite, weren't they? Michelle froze. How do you know that? He didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Finally, he said, You forget, Michelle, I make it my business to know the people I help. Her pulse quickened. Why? Why me? You still don't understand. His voice softened, almost tender. I saw something in you that night. Something. Unspoiled. In my world, that's rare. I'm not unspoiled, she whispered. No, he said. Not anymore. The words hit like a confession, part truth, part claim. She didn't know whether to hang up or ask what he meant. Before she could speak, he continued. Dinner, he said. Tonight.
No excuses.
What? There's a car waiting outside the hospice. It'll take you to Villa di Amoro. Be ready at 8. Her fingers tightened around the phone. My mother. She'll be fine. I've already arranged for a private nurse to stay with her overnight. How can you just? Because I can, he said simply. And because you will come. The line went dead. Michelle stared at the phone, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Outside the window, the sun was setting, the sky bleeding into a palette of gold and violet. Somewhere below, she could already hear the faint purr of an engine waiting. She looked at her mother, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm outside those walls. Her chest ached with gratitude and fear, two emotions that no longer knew where one ended and the other began. The nurse's words replayed in her head. He pays for everything. And now, he wanted dinner. She stood slowly, walking to the mirror by the sink. Her reflection looked pale, uncertain. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and whispered, Is this protection, or control? Her mother stirred softly, murmuring in her sleep. Michelle leaned down, kissing her forehead. I'll be back soon, she promised, though the words tasted like a lie. In the hallway, the lilies glowed ghostly in the dim light, their scent following her like a memory she couldn't shake. The woman from earlier was gone, but Michelle could still feel unseen eyes watching. Outside, the air was cool and heavy with salt. The car waited, sleek and black, its engine purring like a predator at rest. The driver stepped out, bowing slightly. Signorina, Mr. Mancha asked me to escort you personally. She hesitated, her hands trembling. The world seemed to narrow to that moment, the car door open, the horizon fading into dusk, the city of her childhood whispering warnings in every gust of wind. For a heartbeat, she almost turned back. Almost. But curiosity, or fate, pulled harder. As the car doors closed and the city lights flickered to life, Michelle's thoughts tangled in chaos. Gratitude. Guilt. Fear. And underneath it all, a dangerous spark she couldn't extinguish. The memory of his eyes, calm and dark, the way he said her name like it meant something. The sea stretched endless beside the road, waves catching the last of the dying light. And as the villa came into view, white marble against the twilight sky, she realized that whatever waited inside would change everything. The car slowed. Through the windshield, she saw candles flickering through tall glass windows, music drifting faintly through open doors. A lion carved from stone guarded the gate, its eyes fixed on her. Michelle's breath hitched. The lion's gift. If someone helped you like this, but watched your every move, would you still call it kindness? Tell me in the comments below. Is Mancha her savior, or her cage? The car eased to a stop before tall wrought iron gates that groaned open like something ancient and alive. Beyond them, the villa shimmered in the dusk, marble white and haloed by candlelight spilling from tall arched windows. Music drifted faintly through the air, soft jazz, the kind that filled expensive rooms where no one ever danced. Michelle's breath caught. For a moment, she forgot to move. The driver opened her door with practiced grace. He's waiting for you inside, Signorina. She stepped out, her heels crunching on gravel slick with the threat of rain. The scent of jasmine and sea air mingled with something else, wine and smoke, heavy and seductive. Inside, the villa was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors, and every corner was alive with subtle opulence. No noise, no other guests. Just the faint hum of a record player and the distant roll of thunder gathering beyond the cliffs. A man in a black suit, security, though he didn't need to say it, gestured toward the dining room. Michelle hesitated, smoothing the front of her dress. She hadn't planned what to wear. It was a simple black cotton dress from a suitcase, but somehow it felt like walking into a palace in borrowed skin. And then she saw him. Alexis Mancha stood at the far end of a long table, his back to her, gazing out through open French doors that framed the sea. Candlelight flickered along the edges of his face when he turned, and in that moment, the myth she'd built of him, this untouchable, dangerous man, began to crumble. He looked tired. Human. Michelle. His voice was low, rich, carrying easily across the room. You came. I didn't think I had a choice, she replied, her tone careful but steady. A faint smile curved his lips. Choice is an illusion, isn't it? Especially when gratitude and fear live in the same heart. She froze at the precision of it. How easily he named what she couldn't. I just wanted to thank you, she said, her voice small, for helping my mother. He gestured to the seat across from him. You can thank me over dinner. The table was set for two, silverware gleaming, a bottle of red already open, its aroma dark and inviting. She sat slowly, her pulse uneven. For a while, they ate in silence. Mancha watched her, but not with predatory interest. It was something quieter, more complex. As though he was searching for something in her face that he hadn't yet found. You haven't asked me what I do, he said finally. I've heard enough to imagine, she answered. He chuckled softly, swirling his wine. Imagination can be cruel. Sometimes the truth is worse. Sometimes, it's disappointingly ordinary. She met his eyes. So which is it for you? His gaze lingered on hers, long enough that the air between them shifted. Both. Thunder rumbled outside, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the walls. He leaned back, the candlelight catching in his eyes. You remind me of my mother, he said suddenly. She used to light candles when storms came. Said it kept the darkness honest. Michelle blinked, caught off guard by the softness in his voice. Was she from Italy? He nodded once. Sicily. She taught me the language before I could walk. And the silence after, before I could understand what it meant. What happened to her? She asked quietly. His jaw tightened. She married a man who mistook power for love. The kind of mistake you only make once. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle at first, then harder, drumming against the glass. The music on the record player shifted to something slower, sadder. Michelle's fear began to thin, replaced by something else she couldn't name. The man before her wasn't the devil she'd imagined, but neither was he safe. He was a storm disguised as calm, a contradiction wrapped in charm. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. Why me, Alexis? He looked up sharply, surprised she'd used his name. You could help anyone, she continued. So why me? He studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, because you spoke my mother's tongue. And you didn't flinch when I looked at you. Michelle's pulse jumped. That's it. No, he said. But it's where it began. The way he said it, low, unhurried, final, sent a shiver down her spine. The waiter entered briefly, refilling their glasses, but even he seemed part of the silence Mancha carried like armor. When he left, Mancha leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. Do you believe in debts, Michelle? She frowned. Debts? Yes. Not the kind you write down, the kind that live in your chest. Between people. She hesitated. I believe in gratitude. But gratitude doesn't mean surrender. A slow smile touched his lips. You think I want your surrender? I don't know what you want, she admitted. His expression softened. That makes two of us. Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating his face, the strong lines, the quiet loneliness behind his eyes. For the first time, she saw not power, but weight. He reached for his glass, took a slow sip, then said, almost to himself, Power isolates. You speak to me like I'm human. Michelle held his gaze. Maybe you are. Something flickered across his face. Hope, maybe, or danger. That's the most dangerous thing anyone's ever said to me. They sat in silence, the rain now steady, The world reduced to candlelight and the steady rhythm of two people who didn't know what they were becoming. When dessert arrived, small plates of tiramisu she couldn't taste, Mancha stood and walked toward the open doors. The storm had slowed to a mist, the scent of wet earth and sea drifting inside. He turned his head slightly, his voice low. "Do you miss Miami?" The question startled her. "How do you?" "I know more than you think," he said. "The boyfriend, the bruises, the way you ran. You were meant to vanish." Her breath caught. "You had someone look into me." "Of course." He turned to face her fully. "I don't invite strangers into my world, Michelle. I needed to understand who you were before I decided what you could be." Her pulse hammered. "And what am I, then?" He stepped closer. "A reminder." "Of what?" His eyes met hers, dark and unwavering. "That there's still something left in me worth saving." The words landed like a confession. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The wind carried the scent of rain and sea between them, and time slowed. He reached out, tracing a finger along the edge of her wine glass, stopping just short of touching her hand. "You think you're here because I wanted to own you," he said softly. "But maybe I wanted you to see me." She didn't move. Couldn't. "You don't have to play savior," she whispered. "I'm not," he said. "I'm the one who needs saving." The thunder rolled again, a distant echo. He leaned forward, his voice almost a whisper. "Stay in Italy. I'll take care of you." Her breath hitched. "That's not a promise, it's a prison." He smiled sadly. "Maybe. But some cages are gilded for a reason." The lightning flashed again, reflecting in his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't know whether she was terrified or drawn to him. When she finally found her voice, it trembled. "You think you can buy peace. But what happens when it runs out?" He looked at her with something close to pain. "Then we both find out what we really are." The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling like distant gunfire. The candles flickered violently, one by one extinguishing in the draught until only a few remained. Mancha stood motionless, his hand still hovering near hers. She could feel the warmth of him even without contact, like standing too close to a flame. The clock on the far wall ticked softly. Michelle didn't pull away. In that suspended moment, between safety and surrender, between reason and something far more dangerous, she realized the truth. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of herself, and the quiet ache that had taken root somewhere she couldn't reach. Mancha's hand moved at last, slow and deliberate, until it covered hers. The contact was gentle, grounding, but it carried the weight of an unspoken pact. "Stay," he murmured. "Let me take care of you." The rain began again, harder this time, drowning out the world beyond the villa. Michelle closed her eyes. The air was thick with the scent of rain and red wine, and the sound of her heartbeat filled the silence. When she opened her eyes again, his were waiting. Calm, certain, unyielding. The thunder crashed. And just like that, the line between the man and the myth disappeared. If someone offered to take care of you completely, but it meant surrendering control, would you say yes? Tell me in the comments. Is Mancha protecting her, or claiming her? Weeks passed like blurred brushstrokes on a canvas, soft, indistinct, dreamlike. The days melted into one another, stitched together by the rhythmic beeping of machines, the murmur of doctors, and the faint scent of lilies that never left the hospice room. Her mother's color had returned. Her voice, faint but steady, began to find its way back. Each morning, Michelle would sit by her bedside, holding her hand, whispering, "Say forte, Mama, you're strong." It felt like a miracle. But miracles, she was learning, often came with signatures at the bottom. The doctors were unlike any she had ever met, calm, precise, and impossibly expensive. They came and went without fuss, their crisp suits and careful words wrapped in quiet authority. Everything they used, equipment, medication, even the imported linens, carried the faint echo of wealth. When Michelle asked the head nurse about payment, the woman simply smiled and said, "Senor Mancha has already handled everything, Signorina. You should rest." That phrase, "he's handled everything," followed her everywhere. At first, it comforted her. Then it began to haunt her. She had tried to pay for something, anything. Groceries, flowers for her mother's room, even the cab fare to the hospital, but her card never worked anymore. The driver had shaken his head politely. "Already covered, miss." Every restaurant where she sat down, every bill she attempted to settle, It was as though invisible hands reached out before she could move, paying the price in her place. It wasn't kindness anymore. It was control disguised as care. And yet, how could she resent a man who had saved her mother's life? Each evening, when she walked through the courtyard of the Villa Mancha had insisted she stay in, her mother in the medical wing nearby, she tried to remind herself that she was free. But freedom didn't feel like this. Freedom didn't arrive with bodyguards stationed by the gates or a black car shadowing her whenever she went into town. One afternoon, the rain fell gently over the stone courtyard. A violinist sat under a covered archway, playing a haunting Italian ballad that drifted like smoke through the air. Michelle stood by the window, watching drops slide down the glass. For a moment, she saw her reflection, pale, thinner, softer somehow. A woman suspended between privilege and captivity. The door opened quietly behind her. "You're awake early," a voice said. It was Clara, the housekeeper, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a quiet loyalty that made Michelle both grateful and uneasy. "I couldn't sleep," Michelle said. "The rain, it's peaceful." Clara set down a tray of tea and biscotti, then hesitated. "He's been asking about you," she said softly. Michelle turned. "Alexis?" Clara nodded. "He returns from Rome tonight. He asked me to tell you not to go out after sunset." "Why?" Michelle asked, her heart sinking. Clara hesitated, her hands folding over the tray. "Because in his world, protection and possession are the same thing." Then she looked up, her eyes filled with something like pity. "Be careful, Signorina. He never gives without taking." The words hung heavy in the room, like smoke that refused to clear. Michelle didn't answer. She only nodded, her mind racing as Clara left. Outside, the violin continued its melancholy song, the melody curling through her thoughts like a warning. That night, she couldn't bring herself to eat. The villa felt emptier than usual, every shadow whispering her name. She sat by her mother's bedside, tracing her fingers over the rosary beads. Her driver, the ever-silent Lorenzo, opened the car door without question. "Just to the market," she said. He nodded and pulled onto the coastal road, the sea glinting silver beside them. Naples was alive in a way the villa wasn't, noisy, chaotic, filled with laughter and arguments spilling from open cafes. Michelle walked through narrow streets, letting herself disappear into the crowd. She bought fresh bread, a scarf for her mother, and a postcard she would never mail. For a few brief hours, she felt like herself again. But that illusion shattered when she noticed it, the same black sedan parked across the piazza. The same tinted windows. She'd seen it before, near the hospice, near the villa. Watching. Her heart thudded. Mancha's men, she thought. Protecting her, or following her. She quickened her pace, ducking into a side street. The sedan pulled forward slowly. Then another car appeared from the opposite end of the lane, sleek, foreign, and unfamiliar. The driver leaned out the window briefly, scanning the street before slipping back inside. It wasn't Mancha's. She knew that instinctively. Fear prickled at her skin. She crossed the street, heading toward a row of taxis. The driver of the unfamiliar car lowered his window, and for a heartbeat, she caught his eyes, cold, assessing, utterly without warmth. Arrival. She didn't need to know the name to understand what that meant. She climbed into the nearest taxi, breath uneven. "Drive," she told the driver, her voice trembling. "Please, just drive." As they pulled away, she risked a glance behind her. The black sedan, the one that had followed her from the villa, sped up, closing the distance. Between them, the rival's car made a sharp turn, blocking the narrow street. A standoff. The driver cursed under his breath. "What is this, Signorina? Who are these people?" Michelle shook her head. "Just go, take another route." They swerved into the maze of back alleys, tires splashing through puddles. Horns blared. Somewhere behind them, the rival's car screeched to a halt, and a man stepped out, speaking urgently into a phone. Mancha's world, she realized, had found her. Or perhaps, it had never left. When the taxi finally stopped outside the villa gates, her legs trembled as she climbed out. The guards were already there, weapons discreetly hidden, their faces set in grim recognition. Lorenzo appeared from nowhere, ushering her inside without a word. Michelle turned, breathless. Who were they? She demanded. Lorenzo's face remained stone. "People who should not be here," he said quietly. "But they will not come again." "Because of you, or because of him?" she asked bitterly. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, Michelle lay awake, staring at the ceiling as thunder rolled far out at sea. In her mother's room, the monitors beeped softly, a lullaby of borrowed time. Somewhere beyond those walls, Alexis Mancha was making phone calls, calm, efficient, dangerous, cleaning up the mess his name had brought to her doorstep. For the first time, she didn't feel protected by him. She felt surrounded. The violinist's melody drifted faintly through the rain again, low and mournful. And as the thunder cracked, she whispered into the darkness, "What have you done, Alexis? If someone gave you everything you ever needed, but made you afraid to lose it, would you still call it love?" Comment below. The storm answered for him. Lightning split the sky, casting a jagged light through the villa's courtyard. The air felt electric, thick with something more than rain, a tension that hummed like an approaching heartbeat. Michelle stood by the window, staring out into the dark. Somewhere below, engines rumbled, tires screeching against wet stone. Then the first gunshot cracked through the night. She froze. The sound wasn't loud, not the way it was in movies. It was sharp, precise, like glass breaking under pressure. Then another followed. And another. "Alexis," she whispered again, her voice barely audible over the rain. She turned from the window just as the lights flickered and went out. The power was gone. Darkness swallowed the room whole, broken only by the faint blue shimmer of lightning outside. Her heart hammered. Somewhere down the hall, her mother's monitor kept beeping steadily, too calm, too unaware. Michelle grabbed her phone, but before she could unlock it, the door burst open. It was Lorenzo. His face was pale, slick with rain. "Signorina," he hissed. "Stay down." "What's happening?" she gasped. He didn't answer. The sharp metallic click of his pistol echoed as he moved to the window. The courtyard below was chaos, black-clad men moving like shadows through the rain, flashes of muzzle fire reflecting off marble. Bodies darted between the hedges. The fountain, once serene, was now splattered red. Then, through the haze of movement, she saw him. Alexis Mancha, coat-soaked, gun in hand, moving with terrifying precision. He was not the man she had dined with, the one who spoke softly about his mother and the loneliness of power. He was something else now, something raw, unmasked. He shouted an order in Italian, voice sharp and commanding. Two of his men flanked him, returning fire toward the gates where more figures advanced. The metallic smell of gunpowder mixed with rain drifted into the room, sharp enough to make her gag. Lorenzo turned back to her, his voice urgent. "They came for you," he said. "Rival faction. They knew you were here. For me." The words didn't make sense. "Why? I'm no one." He didn't have time to explain. A bullet shattered the upper window, glass raining down like stars. Lorenzo tackled her to the ground, shielding her as fragments cut across her arm. She gasped, the sting of pain jolting her into motion. "Stay here," he ordered. "Don't move." But as he rose, she grabbed his sleeve. "Where's Mancha?" Lorenzo's eyes flicked to the courtyard. Out there, doing what he does best. Michelle crawled to the window and peered through the cracked frame. The courtyard glistened with rain and blood. Mancha moved like a phantom, each motion deliberate, his gun a seamless extension of his will. One man lunged at him from behind. Mancha turned, swift as thought, and fired. The attacker fell face first onto the marble. For a second, everything went still. Then, the gate at the far end of the courtyard exploded inward. Michelle's scream caught in her throat. More men flooded in, a half-dozen at least, and Mancha's guards scrambled to form a barrier. The sound of metal against stone, bullets sparking, and the distant wail of wind created a symphony of chaos. She wanted to look away but couldn't. The man she'd once thought untouchable was fighting for his life, for hers, and there was something terrifyingly beautiful in it. Then she saw it, one of the attackers raising a weapon from the shadows, aiming not at Mancha but at the window above him. At her. She ducked just as the shot tore through the glass. A scream ripped from her chest. "Signorina!" Lorenzo shouted. He yanked her away from the window, his face wild with fear. "You must hide, now." But before he could move her, another explosion rocked the courtyard. The fountain shattered, spraying water and blood. Mancha stumbled, clutching his shoulder. "No!" Michelle screamed. She tore free from Lorenzo's grip, bolting through the hallway. His voice echoed after her, but she didn't stop. She ran past the portraits, past the flickering candles that guttered in the wind. Down the grand staircase, her bare feet slipping on the wet marble. When she burst into the courtyard, the world slowed. Rain poured in sheets, washing crimson streaks into the drains. Mancha was kneeling beside one of his men, pressing a hand to the wound that bloomed darkly across his chest. When he looked up and saw her, his expression was a mix of fury and fear. "Get inside," he roared. She ignored him, rushing to his side. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." His voice was rough, cold. "You shouldn't be here." Another shot rang out, close enough to make her flinch. Mancha turned, firing twice without hesitation. The man who had aimed at them dropped where he stood. Michelle's breath came in shallow gasps. The world tilted. She looked around, the courtyard, the marble stained with red, the rain mixing with blood, and something inside her broke. This is who you are," she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He just reloaded, the click of metal echoing. Then, without looking at her, he said quietly, "This is what protection costs." Tears stung her eyes. "Protection? You call this protection?" He turned then, his face unreadable. "You're alive, aren't you?" A body hit the ground nearby. Michelle flinched, her hands instinctively reaching for Mancha's arm. His gaze flicked down to her fingers gripping his sleeve, trembling, desperate, unwilling to let go, and something inside him shifted. For a moment, time stopped. The rain slowed. The night held its breath. She saw him then, truly saw him, not as a savior, not as a monster, but as both. The man who had built his empire on fear, now bleeding for her in the dark. He stood, wincing, his free hand steadying her. "Go inside," he said again, quieter this time. "Please." Before she could answer, headlights flared beyond the gates. More cars. More danger. Mancha cursed in Italian and pulled her toward the steps. Lorenzo appeared from the shadows, gun still smoking. "Boss, they're retreating." Mancha didn't respond. His focus was on Michelle, who stared at the courtyard in horror, the motionless figures, the blood, the silence after violence. One of the men still moved weakly near the fountain, clutching his stomach. Michelle's instincts overrode her fear. She knelt beside him, pressing her scarf to the wound. "He's still alive," she said. Mancha's voice cut through the rain, hard and final. "He won't be for long." She looked up at him, shocked. "You can't just." His eyes were steel. "He came here to kill you." "But he's human." "So am I," he said. "Most days." Her hands trembled over the dying man's chest. When she looked back at Mancha, the world she thought she understood had cracked beyond repair. A siren wailed faintly in the distance. First one, then several more. Mancha's men exchanged looks. Lorenzo muttered something urgent in Italian. Mancha turned to Michelle, his voice sharp. "The police will come. You saw nothing. Do you understand?" Her lips parted in disbelief. "Alexis." He grabbed her wrist, his grip firm but not cruel. His eyes bored into hers, fierce, pleading, dangerous. "Trust me," he said softly. "And say nothing." Her breath came in ragged bursts. She looked down at her hands, covered in blood. Not hers. Not his. Just blood, staining her fingers, her palms, her soul. The sirens grew louder. Mancha stepped back, his men already moving to clear the scene. One by one, they disappeared into the shadows, efficient and silent. Only the rain remained, and the echo of what had just happened. Michelle stood frozen, the weight of it sinking into her bones. When the first flash of blue light appeared through the gate, Mancha turned to her once more. His voice was calm now, almost gentle. "If they ask, you were with your mother all night. You heard nothing, saw nothing." "And if I tell them the truth?" she asked, her voice shaking. He looked at her, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Then I lose everything, including you." Before she could respond, he was gone, swallowed by the night, by the rain, by the life he could never escape. The courtyard lay silent again. Blood and rain pooled together on the marble, reflecting the flashing lights that drew closer. Michelle sank to her knees, her breath coming in sharp sobs. She looked at her hands, the crimson now diluted to pink by the rain, and whispered, almost to herself, "What have you turned me into?" The sirens wailed louder, drowning her words. "If you saw someone you loved do something unforgivable, but you knew they did it to save you, would you keep their secret? Tell me in the comments. Is Mancha protecting Michelle, or destroying her piece by piece. The snow fell like ash over the Swiss Alps, slow and endless, erasing everything beneath its silence. The world outside the glass was white and cold. Inside, it was firelight and secrets. The safe house was remote, perched at the edge of a frozen lake where no one came without purpose. Mancha had chosen it for that reason. No past, no witnesses, no questions. Michelle sat near the fireplace, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. She hadn't spoken in hours. The crackle of burning wood filled the room, the only sound between them. Mancha stood by the window, his reflection shifting between light and shadow, his expression unreadable. It had been 2 weeks since the blood on the marble. 2 weeks since she'd watched him kill to protect her. They hadn't spoken of it, not really. But silence had its own language. The distance between them was heavy, humming with things neither dared say aloud. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and steady. How many men died that night? Mancha didn't turn around. Enough. Enough, she repeated, her tone sharp with disbelief. That's your answer. He exhaled, fogging the window slightly. You were safe by morning. That's all that matters. That's not all that matters, Alexis. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. You think I can just forget what I saw? The blood, the guns, the way you didn't even flinch. He turned then, slowly, his eyes dark and tired. Do you want me to say I'm sorry? I want you to say you feel something, she snapped. The silence that followed burned hotter than the fire. Mancha stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. You think I don't feel? His voice was low, dangerous in its restraint. Every night I see their faces. Every man I've lost. Every man I've killed. They visit me in dreams, Michelle. They remind me what it costs to keep people alive. Her throat tightened. You mean what it costs to keep me alive? His eyes softened at that. Yes. For a moment, neither of them moved. The flames danced between them, casting gold and scarlet across his face. The face of a man she once thought she could understand, now carved by choices that had no mercy. Michelle set her cup down and stood. You said I was safe here. But safe from who, Alexis? The police? Your rivals? Or from you? He didn't answer. She stepped closer, her anger shaking free. You pay my mother's doctors. You own the villa. You decide who drives me, where I go, what I see. You've turned my life into a prison with better furniture. He flinched, but his expression didn't break. You think I wanted that for you? What else am I supposed to think? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before stopping at the fireplace. Do you remember that night in Naples? When I told you you reminded me of innocence. She hesitated. Yes. I was wrong, he said quietly. You remind me of what I lost. Of what I could never have. Her breath caught. And what's that? He turned, his voice barely above a whisper. Peace. Michelle stared at him, the words clawing at something tender inside her. For all his power, all his wealth, he looked like a man still haunted by hunger, not for money or blood, but for forgiveness. Then stop doing this, she said softly. Let me go. His gaze flicked to hers, sharp again. You think I can? After what you've seen? After what you know? I didn't ask to know any of it, she cried. I just wanted my mother safe. And she is, he said, voice rising. Because of me. Her hands clenched. Because of your money. Do you even hear yourself? Every good thing you've done for me drips with guilt, Alexis. It's all blood disguised as kindness. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he stepped closer until she could feel the heat of him, smell the faint trace of smoke and cologne clinging to his shirt. Maybe, he said. But it's still real. Her heart thudded painfully. You can't buy love with guilt. I'm not trying to buy it. His voice dropped, heavy with something raw. I'm trying to deserve it. The words hit her harder than any confession of crime could. She looked up at him, tears gathering in her eyes. You can't fix what you've broken, Alexis. He gave a small, sad smile. No. But I can keep it from breaking again. When he reached out to touch her, she didn't move. His hand brushed her cheek, tentative, reverent. You were the one thing I didn't plan, he said quietly. The one variable I couldn't control. Her breath hitched. And what happens to things you can't control? He didn't answer, but his eyes told her everything. They were both trapped, in each other, by each other. Outside, the snow kept falling, smothering the world in silence. For a moment, the tension softened. She let him hold her, her forehead resting against his chest. She could hear his heart, steady but heavy, a rhythm built on violence and devotion. And though part of her wanted to run, another part wanted to stay, to believe there was still something good left in him. But the questions wouldn't stop echoing in her mind. How many had died because of him? How many because of her? She stepped back, her voice shaking. Tell me the truth, Alexis. All of it. The money for my mother. The men who died. The people you've hurt. I need to know who you really are. He looked away. You already know. No, she said firmly. I know what you do. Not who you are. Mancha's gaze flicked to the fire. The light carved deep lines into his face. When he finally spoke, his words were low, almost a prayer. I've stolen, destroyed. Built an empire out of fear. Every kindness I've shown has been a strategy. Every debt I've forgiven had a purpose. But you, he paused, his voice breaking. You were never a calculation. Her tears fell freely now. Then why does it still feel like I'm paying for something? He stepped forward, cupping her face in his hands. Because in my world, nothing good survives without cost. She trembled under his touch. And what happens when the cost is too high? He didn't blink. Then we both pay it. For a long time, neither moved. The fire crackled softly, painting their faces in gold. The air between them was charged with everything unsaid. Love, guilt, fear, inevitability. Then the sound came. A phone ringing, sharp and shrill, slicing through the quiet like a blade. Michelle jumped. Mancha's expression hardened instantly. He crossed the room, answering it with the calm of a man who'd faced 1,000 emergencies. But as he listened, his face changed, his composure cracking for the first time. When he hung up, he didn't speak. Who was it? Michelle asked. He turned to her, his eyes unreadable. The hospital. Her heart lurched. What happened? Your mother, he said quietly. It's her heart. She doesn't have much time. The world tilted. For a second, she couldn't breathe. I have to go. You can't, he said, voice firm. It's too dangerous. They'll be watching the airports. The police. My rivals. Everyone. She shook her head violently. I don't care. She's dying, Alexis. He stepped toward her, his voice rising. If you go now, they'll find you. They'll use you to get to me. Then let them, she cried, tears spilling. You've already taken everything else. Don't take her too. He looked at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then, quietly, he said, You think I don't understand loss? You don't understand love, she whispered. Not the kind that lets go. The silence between them cracked like ice under pressure. Mancha turned away, jaw clenched. For the first time, he looked old, worn by his own empire, haunted by every life it had consumed. Finally, he spoke. You'll have a driver in an hour. He'll take you to Naples. Michelle blinked. You're letting me go. His voice was low, almost a whisper. No. I'm setting you free. Her tears blurred everything. The firelight, the snow, the man she loved and feared in equal measure. She stepped closer, searching his face. And what about you? He smiled faintly, without warmth. I've made my confessions. Some sins you don't recover from. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, firm, steady, final. When she left the room, the snow was still falling. The world outside looked pure again, untouched. But she knew better now. Purity was just what the world looked like after everything had died beneath it. If someone confessed every sin to you, every dark truth, but you still love them, would you stay or walk away? Tell me in the comments. The train to Naples cut through dawn's silence like a blade through silk. The windows were misted, the world outside pale and still. Michelle sat by herself, the rosary wrapped tight around her wrist, her fingers trembling as she whispered prayers she wasn't sure anyone still heard. The world blurred past, fields, fog, and fragments of old memories, and for once, she didn't try to hold them back. She had barely slept since leaving Switzerland. The night before had been a blur of packed bags, Mancha's voice giving orders she couldn't comprehend, and the sound of the car door closing as she was driven away from him. Now, every mile between them felt like a fracture widening, part of her breaking, part of her healing. She didn't know which. Her mother was dying. That was the only truth left that made sense. When the train pulled into the station, the air hit her like a forgotten dream. Warm, scented with sea salt and orange blossoms. Naples was alive, chaotic, human. It was everything her life with Mancha wasn't. But beneath its familiar beauty lingered an ache, the kind that lived in the walls and whispered through alleyways that remembered her childhood laughter. A black car waited by the curb, sleek and silent. She didn't recognize the driver, but she didn't have to ask who had sent him. Mancha's touch was everywhere, even here, in the one place she had hoped he couldn't reach. "Miss Hernandez?" the driver asked. She hesitated, her pulse quickening. "You're from Mr. Mancha, aren't you?" He gave a polite nod. He insisted I ensure you arrived safely at the hospice. Michelle wanted to argue, to tell him she could find her own way, but the exhaustion was too heavy. She climbed into the back seat, clutching the rosary tighter, the beads biting into her palm like pennants. The drive wound along narrow streets lined with crumbling buildings and hanging laundry. The sun was rising now, streaking the sky in pink and gold. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. But peace was a fragile illusion. She knew that too well. When they reached the hospice, she stepped out into a courtyard that smelled faintly of lilies. The air was soft, quiet except for the sound of waves in the distance. A nurse met her at the door, her face kind but serious. "She's been asking for you," the woman said gently. Michelle's heart twisted. She followed her through the hall, every step heavier than the last. Her mother lay in a small, sunlit room overlooking the sea. The light caught the silver strands in her hair, the fragile rise and fall of her chest. But what caught Michelle's breath was the vase of fresh white roses by the window, and the small card tucked among them. It bore a single line written in elegant script. "For the woman who gave the world its only light. A.M." Her hand shook as she read it. Mancha. Even here, in the final hours of her mother's life, his presence wrapped around her like silk and chain at once. She sat beside the bed, taking her mother's frail hand in both of hers. "Mama," she whispered, tears spilling before she could stop them. "It's me." Her mother's eyelids fluttered open, a faint smile touching her lips. "Mi figlia." "I'm here," Michelle said softly. "I'm right here." The hours that followed moved like a slow, aching waltz. They spoke in whispers, their voices trembling between laughter and tears. Michelle told her about the restaurant in New York, about the snow, about how she'd found a kind of home even in places that weren't safe. She didn't mention Mancha's name, but she didn't need to. Mothers always know the names of the men who haunt their daughters. Outside, the day faded into dusk. Church bells began to toll somewhere far away, their echoes carried on the sea wind. The scent of lilies thickened in the air. And then, he came. She felt him before she saw him. The quiet shift in the air, the faint rhythm of footsteps that carried weight even when trying to be soft. When she turned, Alexis Mancha stood in the doorway. He was dressed simply, dark coat, no tie, but nothing could make him ordinary. His presence filled the room, shadow and light colliding in the same breath. For a heartbeat, Michelle couldn't move. She hadn't expected him to come. Not after Switzerland. Not after everything they'd said. "Why are you here?" she whispered. His voice was low, reverent. "To say goodbye. To both of you." Her mother stirred faintly at the sound. Her eyes fluttered open again, settling on the tall man by the door. Something softened in her expression, even through the haze of pain. She didn't know who he was, but she saw what he meant to her daughter. Some things didn't need translation. Mancha stepped closer, kneeling beside the bed with quiet respect. He took the old woman's hand and bowed his head. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice unsteady. "For her." Michelle's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen him look so human, so unguarded. The mask of power had slipped away, revealing the man underneath, the one who carried too much guilt and too little forgiveness. Her mother smiled faintly, her voice barely a whisper. "Love can save even the damned." The words hung in the air, fragile as glass. Mancha's jaw tightened, his eyes glistening. "Then I hope she's right," he said softly. For a moment, the world stood still. The setting sun bathed the room in gold, and everything, Grief, love, regret, blurred together into something unbearably beautiful. Hours passed in silence. The machines hummed softly. Michelle held her mother's hand until it grew still beneath her fingers. When the monitors went quiet, she didn't cry, not right away. She just sat there, the last warmth of her mother's hand fading into her palms, and whispered a prayer that felt like both goodbye and forgiveness. It wasn't until she felt Mancha's hand on her shoulder that the tears came. She turned, burying her face against him, her sobs breaking free. And for once, he didn't speak. He just held her. When she finally looked up, his expression was unreadable again, but there was something new in it. Resolution. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. He glanced toward the window, where the night had begun to settle. "That it's time to stop running." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. Official, stamped, final. "I called my lawyer. The authorities will meet me tomorrow." Michelle's blood ran cold. "No, Alexis, you can't." "I can," he interrupted gently. "And I will." Her heart pounded. "They'll destroy you. Everything you've built." He smiled faintly. "Everything I built was already poison. You said it yourself. My kindness drips with guilt. Maybe it's time to let the world take what's left." She shook her head, tears spilling again. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." He stepped closer, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I've taken too much from too many people. For once, I want to give something back." "By giving yourself up," she whispered. "By giving you freedom," he said simply. "They'll come for you too if I don't. This way, they won't. I've made sure of it." Michelle felt her chest tighten. "And what about us?" He hesitated, his voice breaking. "There was never an us that the world could allow. But maybe, one day, you'll remember me for the man I tried to be, not the one I was." The words hit harder than any goodbye. She wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but she knew this was the only way. Redemption was never easy. The next morning came too soon. Naples was grey and quiet, rain falling in soft sheets. The air tasted like salt and sorrow. Mancha stood at the edge of the pier, the sea behind him, police cars waiting in the distance. Michelle stood a few paces away, clutching her mother's rosary in one hand, her heart in the other. He turned once, his dark eyes meeting hers across the space between them. "Don't wait for me," he said. She shook her head, tears streaming. "I never stopped." He smiled faintly, then stepped forward as the officers approached. No struggle. No words. Just a man walking toward his own penance. The handcuffs clicked softly, almost respectfully. When they led him away, he glanced back one last time. Their eyes met through the rain, through everything they destroyed and everything they tried to save. And then he was gone. Michelle stood there long after the cars disappeared into the mist. The church bells began to toll again, slow and solemn, the sound of endings and beginnings all at once. She turned toward the sea, whispering into the wind. "You were wrong, Alexis. Love doesn't just save the damned, it saves what they leave behind." As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, she closed her eyes and let the wind carry her tears. Somewhere, across the distance, she imagined him hearing them. It began with a single word in Italian, spoken to save her mother, but it saved his soul instead.
Thanks so much for watching till the end. If this story moved you, you're going to love what's coming next. It's even more surprising and emotional than this one. Go ahead and click the story on your screen right now, and see you in the next story.